Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sterling Live. My name is Caitlin Brower. I am Sterling's social media manager, and Sterling Live is our live series that we come to you every single week across Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We are so excited to have you here today live with us because look at the two amazing guests I have on top of the screen right now. So I'll go ahead and introduce our amazing guests. So we have Katie Zwetzig, Executive Director of Sterling Volunteers. And we do have someone outside of Sterling joining us today, which we are very excited about. So I'd like to introduce Mei Cobb, Senior Director, Volunteer and Employee Engagement for United Way Worldwide. And today our topic is amplifying volunteer community success. So it's going to be a great episode. These two individuals that are with us today are truly great. So now I'm going to pass it over to them to introduce themselves. So Katie, let's start with you. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Thanks, Caitlin. And first off, thanks, Mei, for joining us. This is going to be a fun conversation. I'm really grateful that you're taking the time to do this. I'm Katie Zwetzig, as Caitlin said, Executive Director of Sterling Volunteers, really responsible for all things Sterling Volunteers, including our engagement with partners like United Way Worldwide, customers, and getting volunteers mobilized. One thing that most people don't know is that Sterling Volunteers actually started with a conversation with United Way. Way back when I was on the board of directors in Larimer County, Colorado, where I live, and started having a conversation with the then CEO, Gordon Thibodeau, about how we could build out communities of vetted volunteers. And in Fort Collins, which always has a very, very high level of volunteer engagement, it was a great conversation to have because volunteers were volunteering more than generally about 2 to 3 places. And so people were doing multiple background checks, volunteers were taking more time to get background screened and so forth. And so that conversation with Gordon on how we could build out a sharing model and a platform and so forth to mobilize volunteers more quickly really was the catalyst to where we are today. So it's really fun to have Mei here kind of full circle with our partnership with United Way Worldwide.
I love starting off the episode with such a great story like that. And I'm sure our audience is very intrigued about it. And also to now learn a little bit more, let's come full circle, a little bit more about United Way Worldwide. So Mei, can you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience and then share a little bit about the organization as well?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Thanks, Katie, and thanks, Caitlin. I'm really pleased to be with everyone today and looking forward to this conversation. United Way fights for the health, education, and financial stability of every person in every community. And I'm based at our headquarters office, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. And I lead our volunteer engagement work. And so that's working with 1,800 local United Ways around the world in 40 countries, and really looking at volunteer engagement and really being strategic of how volunteering really is a way to build relationships with individuals, help to understand, what they're interested in, what issues they care about. It's a way to generate revenue. It's a way to find, provide support for the work that we do. And it also drives impact. And that's probably most important, is the difference it makes. And what I think is interesting is that the impact isn't necessarily just in the community. It's also the impact that it has on the individual that's engaged in volunteering. And there's more and more research about the positive health benefits even for those people that volunteer regularly. So happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Happy that you're here as well. And again, thank you to both of you for being here. Very, very excited. So I do want to take this time. Well, Katie, here you go. Quick shout out for you on LinkedIn. You are going to be great. You are a plethora of knowledge and so great to work with. So I can also attest to that. Katie is very much all of those things. So with that comment just shared on LinkedIn, I do want to remind our audience, if you have comments, if you have questions for Mei or Katie, please go ahead and submit them in the comment box on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, and I will field them over to these guests as I see fit. But let's go ahead and get started. As I said earlier, our topic today is amplifying volunteer community success, and we have a lot to talk about. So let's go ahead and get into it. So I want to talk about first the revitalized state of volunteerism. So Katie, I'm going to kick it over to you right away. So how is volunteerism, currently thriving as we move through and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, well, thanks. We had a couple of Sterling Lives last year, and last year, 2020, the nonprofits really took a hit. And so I am so pleased that the nonprofits have rebounded. We are seeing it across all sectors, some sectors stronger than others and moving faster than others, but it's really being amplified in all sectors. So that's great. Seems to me there's a new energy to volunteerism. And so I think back to Points of Light, one of our other partners did a report last year called Civic Life Today. And in that, 36% of the people surveyed said that they had volunteered the previous year, but 73% said that they were going to volunteer post-pandemic. And so certainly we think, it seems like they are. Also, another interesting stat is 85% of nonprofits are seeing an increase in volunteerism requests. So it's great. I mean, it feels even stronger than 2019, which is great. And a lot of it is coming from, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. 50% of them say that they're going to volunteer. And I think we're going to talk about CSR programs, and they're certainly driving, some of the things that are happening on the corporate side.
Yeah, I love that. I do, love seeing the younger generation getting more and more interested in it. Mei, not sure if you had anything, to add in response to, volunteerism thriving right now.
It was such a hit that I think everyone took, and it was hard to imagine how it might return and come back. But we too, through our work, are seeing a continual growth, and certainly the virtual and the remote options aren't going away. And so while we've always had some options like that for people, it really was limited. It was for those few individuals that worked remotely. And you can see from my surroundings, I'm still, remote myself. But it really pushed us to accelerate options. And I think so many did that. And those options, I don't think are going away. We certainly don't see those vanishing. So I think that's one important piece that's going to certainly happen.
So volunteers are definitely doing a lot to help sustain nonprofits right now. So I'm curious as to, some examples that we may have there. So Katie, I'll start with you. What are specifically volunteers doing to help sustain these nonprofits?
Yeah, I would say, certainly, I would say that the areas that got hit by COVID, there's a lot of volunteerism still there in food insecurity and some of those areas, poverty and child and youth mentoring. So I think that there's been an increase in mentoring as well. The other thing that I think is interesting is family volunteerism is on the rise. And so this was kind of a trend that was starting in 2018, 2019. But now, as Mei said, you have parents working from home. They have a little bit more flexible schedules. They're not traveling as much. They're not commuting as much. Kids are doing school from home. And so families are able to volunteer together. And so some of the nonprofits that we work with, are capitalizing on that. How do we get mom, dad, and even siblings to be able to volunteer?
I would echo that too. I think we've seen where even to do things with other family members through online opportunities where grandma and grandkids might be participating in something together to have that connection, but doing something that they then can support in the community and deliver whatever it is they might put together, whether it's a flower pot with flowers to take somewhere, or whether they've made a craft to deliver someone and brighten their day. But we're seeing all sorts of innovative and creative things that people are doing.
I really do like that idea of, bringing families together before the greater good. So they're having that special time with each other, but ultimately it is helping out those in need. So I really do think that's a great point to bring up there. So So let's look at from the other perspective. So let's look at now nonprofits and how they're engaging volunteers. So May, I have this question for you. What are these nonprofits doing to engage volunteers right now?
They are trying everything. I think people are really trying, especially those that may have been caught really flat-footed and not prepared to, or didn't have anything, or the demographic, the group of people that were typically their volunteers, were suddenly unable to volunteer or unwilling to participate because of the unknown and all. So it has really forced all of us to sort of think through how can we reach different people, particularly when we might have developed a certain path or a way that we're working with individuals. So that's been different. And then just being able to do the work in other ways. I mean, we know of organizations that were like, I have to have people come in. I want to see them. I want to talk to them. And I'm like, that isn't an option. And so I think it's freed a lot of people from, maybe some self-imposed requirements or things around that. But our trainings are always in person. Well, no, we figured out how to do trainings online, or the way that we're communicating. And I think we've been challenged, particularly with those people that might not have access to a computer. I think of my father, he loved going to the library. That's how he, would get online. It was a social thing, and he hasn't been able to do that in over a year. And so, he needs to be called. I mean, someone needs to reach him that way. And so I think people have really been sort of flexible and trying to innovate and come up with ways, and people are sharing. I mean, I think people are looking at each other. I just get a great sense of the collegial nature of our field of nonprofits, helping each other out with ideas of what can be done, and people pulling together. If we know we're trying to get food to certain individuals, is there a way that we can partner with a business who can partner with another? I mean, we're trying all sorts of things, and social media on top of that as well as another way to, sort of get the word out. So people have grown tremendously this past year, truly.
It's a time to get creative for sure. And all of the examples that you've just provided shows, how these nonprofits are getting creative and keeping volunteers engaged. So shifting a little bit, because we have to continue to engage volunteers, but we're at a time where it's continuing to get to pick back up. These organizations are going to have to bring on new volunteers, so recruit and retain and everything like that. So let's talk a little bit about volunteer recruitment. So Katie, I'll come to you first with this question: how are nonprofits rethinking their recruitment strategies right now?
Yeah, well, I think May hit it really well. And the example of her father is a good one. I think we've talked before about one of the things I love that happened in COVID, and you have to look for those things that you love in COVID, right? Was that nonprofits could recruit from anywhere for the correct volunteer opportunities. So I think about Meals on Wheels America, who could recruit for, a Zoom call or a check-in with an elderly person in Los Angeles, but that volunteer could be in New York. And, May's example of her dad is exactly right. That person who's checking in on him doesn't have to be in the same city.
Right.
And so I think that just broke down those geographical boundaries. May also hit the hybrid solutions. I agree, they're here to stay. People like working from home. The numbers and stats show that. And so they want some kind of hybrid solution, and maybe they'll volunteer in person for some things and virtually for others. And so I think that that's not going anywhere. And then the other thing that we've seen is just an increase. I think unfortunately a lot of people had to let go of their volunteer managers or rethink their recruiting strategies, and they got a little bit more savvy with systems. And so we have seen about a 30% increase in requests to integrate with volunteer management systems over the past year. And I think people, that as May said, you can also have a learning module, a training module, and so forth. So I think those are some of the ways that recruitment has changed.
Mei, are you seeing any other types of changes within recruitment? The one thing I would add to that, that's not, it's impacted by the pandemic, certainly, but I think it's also impacted by all of the conversations and all of the incidents around racial equity. And I think it's really pushed people to disaggregate, sort of like begin to look at who really are our volunteers. Is it reflective of the communities? Where are we sending people to do activities and things? Is it just the easiest thing we could find, or are we really targeting areas of the community people most vulnerable, most in need. And while, I would say as nonprofits, I think generally, of course, we're doing that, but could we be better? I think it's given people an opportunity as we think about recruiting, as we think about doing this, to hold that up and like reflect and take steps that's more responsive to be more equitable in our work.
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of great, insights shared in regards to, engaging current volunteers, but also bringing on new ones as we are seeing a lift in interest. So making sure, organizations are recruiting, getting a little creative, a little savvy, seeing what we're doing there. So let's move over now. And Mei, I know we're going to have some great insight from you on this part of the episode. We want to talk about CSR volunteer programs. So the first question I do have for you, Mei, is, are CSR volunteer programs gaining traction and moving the needle for nonprofit organizations?
I would say a resounding yes. I absolutely. And I think, there are companies, businesses that are continuing to evolve, and some are just, establishing programs. I think this has been an opportunity for people to think about, how to go about doing that. And we've worked certainly with lots of companies, always, but especially during the pandemic. We met new partners and new companies that we'd never done work with before. And so it really was an opportunity for that, but it also forced existing relationships to really sort of think through, what else could we be doing? What should we be doing? And we just saw so many people, of course, the dramatic sort of shift from, we were going to do this in-person thing with hundreds of people to, so the numbers may have decreased. And one of the things we looked at on our own for what happened this past year is that we saw a decrease of about, almost half of the numbers of volunteers that we would engage. But we were so sort of surprised by the number of beneficiaries that we were able to impact was about the same, if not more. So I think people are trying to be even more thoughtful and deliberate about the types of activities and things that they're doing. We worked with a lot of ERGs or BRGs, the employee resource groups within companies. And so that I think has definitely emerged this past year as well as being really, really important. And I think honestly, like sort of the genuine care and interest of companies for their own employees, and really listening to the needs that they have, because they might have a child right underneath the desk, that they're trying to manage and walk, or someone outside that's doing just all the stuff that's going on. So I think companies really tried to be responsive to employees. And I think it was an opportunity for employees to sort of weigh in on the overall sort of a strategy for the company, for the business, and what it had and what they saw as needs. So we've worked with folks that said, I know this is typically what we do, and we typically tend to focus on this, but my God, there's so many isolated seniors. We've got to do something about it. So people were very flexible around that. And I would say looking for longer term and sort of deep relationships with nonprofits and organizations. So this was a time, to really sort of connect with the companies you're working with, to connect with the nonprofits, and really say, how can we really come together, and how we're dependent on each other to accomplish these things. So there was a lot of that, and I continue to see that happening now, even as we're seeing more in-person activities begin to happen again.
I think that's great. And you had mentioned early on, the 100-person in-person event, 100 people, and then having to make the shift. And now we are seeing a little bit more in person again, bringing up the idea of a hybrid model. So I'm curious as to how you're seeing companies incorporate that hybrid approach, that hybrid model to corporate volunteer programs.
So it's interesting. I think of some of our companies, UPS or DHL we're working with, or Pitney Bowes, and they would be the first to say, we had essential workers. We never were working from home. Our folks were out there doing these things. And so they still wanted to be able to provide opportunity on site, for them to engage. They may not have gone somewhere, but they were still doing that. But, top of our list were, what are the safety precautions for that? What's required? And sure, sometimes it was closed-toe shoes because you're going to be doing something out, like things like that this was very different, the things that we were looking at. And so they've just, I think have had to have a menu of opportunities. And if there's one thing I would suggest on this front is I think that's what's really important. There isn't the one size fits all, and we're all just going to have a great time at this massive event. I think it's still a great way, and people love it for all the different things that it can accomplish, from the team building, from visibility, from, just all sorts of things. But I think having an array of opportunities is really what's needed. And so how do we do this for a smaller group that wants to focus on leadership skills? And so maybe we look for board opportunities for them. Or how do we do this with a group who can't leave the site? We find opportunities. So it really is this mixture. So it's more work, I think, for those folks that are managing these things within companies. But that's where I think organizations like ours and others can really be helpful and supportive in doing that and navigating, because folks are looking for the range of opportunities because they're going to continue to work remotely. So can we engage online? Or I'd love to do something, and so here's a remote thing where I can go drop something off, but I'm not going into the office per se to do this activity and such.
I definitely want to touch on hybrid models a little bit more and dive deeper, but I do want to take a couple of steps back because, Mei, you did bring up something that was very interesting in the beginning with the first question around partnering with organizations that you never thought you'd be partnering with, or or anything like that. So I do want to talk about right now, what kind of partnerships in CSR programs are we seeing?
Well, I probably get a call a day from someone that's looking, to do something where I have to Google the company because I'm not even quite sure, who they are and where they're based. And we have worked with folks that are, maybe multinationals that may be headquartered outside of the United States or in the U.S. But it's been so interesting. We work with a Norton LifeLock, and one of the things that they wanted to do was to support a team of employees that they have in Ireland. Well, we don't even have an operation in Ireland, but it wasn't a problem for us to do this thing, to celebrate International Women's Day, to provide opportunity for women who are going to re-enter the workforce, to hear from women at all different levels throughout Norton LifeLock, to sort of have a career panel hosted in Dublin, for the women there. So it's who would have thought of that as something that we would want to do, or even fathom that we could do that and partner with other organizations on the ground, in Dublin that could engage with the women. So it's just opened the doors for us to think very differently about how we can accomplish things, and who to lean on, and who are those resources and colleagues where we've worked with them for years, but now we know, well, you've got someone in Dublin. Is there some way that we could make this connection? So that's the thing, I think, the silver lining to Katie's point of the positives from this, of seeing those things. And we worked with DraftKings, or the Jacksepticeye, the gaming thing, was raising, it was phenomenal. And that wasn't someone, I don't know that I would have known about, my kids did, but it's things like that it just, I think it people saw the need, and people stepped up in creative ways. And I think that's sort of the message for us to say, we've got to get ourselves outside of our box, or out of the way that we continue to lift our heads up and sort of say, what is possible? What, who could we be reaching out to help make this easier, that we don't have to put this all on ourselves, that people do want to help. And it's been a really great time to experiment in that and to build those sort of new relationships with people.
I love those two examples for sure. I think they really hit exactly what we were trying to accomplish here. So Katie, not sure if you have anything to add, just given how important partnerships are to Sterling volunteers.
Yeah, I think I love Mei's examples on the national level. I think to my community, Timberline Church here locally, every Tuesday night, coordinated and worked with a local restaurant who, was laying off workers, but they brought workers back in to make food and deliveries for shut-ins and impoverished people. So throughout Fort Collins, there were all these restaurants cooking on Tuesday nights and employing people and so forth. And so I think it was widespread, national, local, and everybody did what they could and stepped up and got really, really creative. The other thing, I would add a little bit different line, but when we talk about those CSR programs and some of our systems, we are seeing partnerships, VMS partners, for instance, that are building out CSR platforms to help make that easier to have volunteer engagement within a corporation. We even see it on our broader Sterling side. We're seeing ATS system, applicant tracking systems, that are partnering now, like Workday and Benevity, where they can just do this a little bit simpler. So I think that the technology will also help support some of these programs and do some of the things that Mei has highlighted so well.
That's a great point. I mean, we work with Philanthropy Cloud, the Salesforce piece, and I'm thinking of all the DIY things that people, and while companies, I think this is one of the things, may not historically have approved or accepted things that you just sort of did on your own, or it may not have involved a 501c3 nonprofit, organization or a school. It's like, I'm checking in on our neighbors. I'm doing these things to support these people. I'm making sure these folks are getting their medication. I mean, like these acts of kindness and such. And so I think by having that, using technology to sort of share those ideas, because a lot of people, I mean, we live and breathe this each day, but a lot of people don't, they're doing other things. They're not thinking about it. So it's been great for them to sort of see and get inspired, motivated of other things that they could easily do with their family, with a neighborhood group. And so it's been great for companies to also say, we accept that, we understand that, we know that that's something that we want to also count as part of what's happening in the work of our communities.
That's great. So I did want to come back real quick to hybrid volunteering, and I have two questions, but we can merge them into one for sure. And Katie, I can hand it off to you to start. So are there specific sectors that we're really seeing that hybrid model come to life and lift off? And then what are we hearing from those sectors? So what's the feedback?
Yeah, and I think for us in our client base, where we see the most of the hybrid taking hold is in the mentoring. So there's some great examples like ACE Mentoring. They're having some small groups that are in person, but by and large, a lot of their mentoring is still hybrid and online. And I think we talked before about Big Brothers Big Sisters. They spent some time building out their platform so you could have a really great engagement between a big and a little online last year, and they're continuing to do that. And then I think about FIRST. FIRST puts about 100,000 volunteers throughout the nation in their STEM and robotics programs throughout high schools. And last year they had their first online competition. So they've always had these huge competitions in Houston and so forth, where everybody, all the winning Lego and robotics teams come. They did it and went online, and it was great because they had people internationally come, and what a big coup that was. And so they're still doing online competitions this year. So I just think, people have made this work, and there's been some really good growth areas and momentum, and it's just allowed more volunteers to kind of plug in where they can.
That's great. And that's exactly what I pulled out of that response, is that there were so many shifts that had to happen, but it uncovered new opportunities and actually successful new opportunities. I love that robotics example. It's really to have people come in internationally and watch, which was not clearly an option prior. So, and that's great that they're continuing to advance on that, even if more so in-person competitions come to life again. Mei, anything on your end that you're seeing from sectors doing hybrid models, seeing success, and just general feedback?
The mentoring thing made me think of EY and all of the work that they're looking at, the digital divide, and some of it is around the technology that was needed, not just for the kids, learning remotely, but like teachers who weren't prepared to teach that way. And then, all of the things, in between, as people had to look for new careers or lost their job, so it's just a massively important piece. It also made me think about Kellogg's, and they, we haven't talked about it yet, but sort of the growth around skills-based volunteering. And they were really looking at piloting a project to provide skills-based opportunity that were tied to development areas for employees. So as you did your performance reviews and identified ways that you wanted to grow, were there some volunteer activities that you could be doing? And again, typically we would scramble to find something, in that market. But but having the geography sort of open up, we could have someone in Battle Creek, supporting somebody in Chicago or in Columbia. I mean, it was just amazing in that sense. And so I think that's another sort of like powerful way that this has forced us to be creative and find other ways and leverage relationships and other opportunities to have impact in our communities.
Exactly. So to bring the hybrid conversation, given that there is now in-person volunteering, I want to tie it to the relief efforts for COVID-19, specifically to vaccine distribution and how that's evolving as well as that becomes more and more popular, so to say. So Katie, I'll start with you. How specifically are nonprofit organizations continuing to help with the relief effort, specifically with, the vaccine distribution?
So we've seen a number of healthcare organizations reach out to us to, screen their volunteers to deliver vaccines, as well as volunteer centers. And it tends to be kind of state specific, but California volunteers, working with the vaccine distribution there. Other ones went through the state and healthcare systems within the states. But it was a nice transition to start seeing the end of the pandemic and people starting to get vaccines. Mei probably knows, has some other examples. I think she's more in the middle of it than we are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, like India has been going through such a growth, a rise in the numbers. And, there was just sort of a tremendous amount of relief efforts from a financial standpoint of people making contributions around that front. But we certainly have, I think of the United Way of Greater Rochester in New York that actually, supports, mobilized volunteers for their vaccine sites, an actual location there, or a United Way, I think in Lewis County in the state of Washington, that helped orchestrate sort of the drive-through vaccine. And so, so all of that is happening, or it makes me even think of, like our work with Lyft around Ride United. And it was really a mechanism to transport, individuals to look for, having medical appointments or to do an interview for a job and so forth. And it's evolved, now to also getting people to vaccines. And really, I think the important piece too is, again, that while we were all impacted by the pandemic, some of us were more impacted than others. And it was really trying to say, well, how can we work with the most vulnerable or the people that aren't close or don't have an easy way to get to? It's not just looking at the overall statistics of, yay, we've hit this, percentage. It's like, well, is that true across zip codes? Is that true across the different demographics within the community and such? And that's why even like, President Biden and the campaign to really, focus on young adults and really doing targeted outreach around that. Or the United Way in New York City is a part of a coalition that's really focused on the African American community and how best to reach that population in the community and what needs to be done. So I think there's a lot of different efforts around that. And then generally speaking, I think so many people are engaging volunteers in so many different facets around even advocacy and promotion around it, transportation, the organization around it. But I think in the United States, it's become somewhat easier, certainly. But we see the spikes continue to grow and communities are sort of responding in very different ways. So it's been something that everybody has sort of really had to drive locally to make sure they're doing what's required and needed based on where they are.
That's a really interesting shift of focus, in the beginning, having, the distribution of the vaccine, delivering the vaccine, having volunteers working at sites, and now the focus shifting to getting people, to the facilities, that transportation mode. So I think that's a great example to bring up of how an organization had to shift their focus because of everything. So hopefully that we'll continue to see, this relief effort evolve and organizations really stepping up and getting as many volunteers as they can to push us more towards the lighter side of what's coming around the corner here.
Right. I mean, that makes me think that even in India, they realized they needed to do mobile vaccines, that they had to go to people, that it was unrealistic for them to think that the people who needed were going to be able to get wherever, or to some central location. So they really emphasized, sort of the mobile distribution of vaccines. So again, it's that theme of creativity and people innovating as the crisis creating the necessity for invention.
So to go off of the topic of amplifying our volunteer community success, and our entire discussion today has really been uplifting to know that volunteerism is spiking, whether it's from a virtual, approach, a hybrid approach, or organizations truly looking to get back to fully in person. So with that in mind, it's important to understand keeping these communities safe, keeping our volunteers safe, the nonprofits safe, and the communities in which we serve safe as well. So I want to round out our conversation today about talking about trust and safety within nonprofits and this volunteer community. So Katie, given Sterling and Sterling Volunteers, I will toss this first question to you. Are we seeing any changes in background screening and identity services for volunteers?
Yes, certainly. So I think that there's been a couple of things that we've seen in the last couple of, certainly in the last months as volunteerism is researched. One is we have clients who are asking us about rescreening policies, and people have thought about those. Okay, I haven't seen my volunteer for a year. Do I need to rescreen them? And so a lot of thoughtful conversation on what policies and procedures are within a given nonprofit has happened. And then also on the identity side, that's a great point, Caitlin, because we have more and more nonprofits that want to screen for identity as a basic element of trust as part of a background check. And so as we talk about hybrid volunteerism, the volunteer is no longer necessarily walking into the nonprofit, saying hello, having their identity checked and so forth. We have volunteers all over. And so checking out that identity is really, really critical. And we talked about this last time, but Sterling just rolled out an exclusive partnership with ID.me, who has 40 million volunteers and individuals within the states who have already gone through that identity verification, whether it's for checking into an MGM or being part of the VA or getting your driver's license through California DMV. And so we have overlaid that identity piece on our background screening, and people are really finding a lot of value for that.
Very exciting announcement coming from Sterling for sure. I know there is a lot of discussion, and it's truly great to get that out there and to just help organizations further and build that trust and safety like we are talking about. So Katie, right away you had mentioned organizations discussing rescreening and asking what that's about. Mei, I'll ask you the question: are you seeing nonprofits in particular rethinking their screening programs, whether it is the topic of rescreening or other parts of the background screening process?
I will answer the question, but it made me think that, one other thing that we saw so much of was people just sort of stepping up and doing things on their own. So it wasn't that they were a formal nonprofit. I was just going to start doing stuff, and it sounded like a good idea. And so we've seen folks, who actually did that, and it was like, I hope they're, like taking care of some of these things or thinking about it. And now a year into it, they're like, we're not going to continue to do this. We'd like to, pass this off or do something with it. And so I think it's caused others, as they've seen things like that, to say, how are we doing this? Or how are we doing it with folks being at home or having access to certain information? And so are we making sure that we're taking care of these things? So I too, think that's incredible and really important. And I just want to say I'm, so appreciative to Sterling for the offer that they made in the midst of this, not knowing, what was to come, but providing the resource to so many United Ways, but other organizations as well, to take advantage of it. Because I think it is that reminder, like, this is important. And if you're doing these types of things, or as you're going into this space, you ought to be thinking about this. This is really a best practice for you. So we continue to certainly see that happening.
And Mei, you're talking about the free background checks.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm really
because I think
happy,
people were starting to do all sorts of different things, and we were like, this is a good reminder, and it was great to be able to offer it for free, so that wouldn't be an impediment, to sort of the momentum. of their interest and the need that they were seeing. But certainly, as folks continue, that we hope that that's something they certainly plan for, and we'll wait with bated breath to hear more announcements about the things to come.
Absolutely. And I'm so happy you brought that up, because I did want to ask the two of you about partnerships and how they really promote trust and safety, and why it's so important for organizations like United Way and Sterling Volunteers to get together. So I think, Mei, you answered it already without me even asking you, which I think is great. But Katie, do you have anything to add in regards to why are partnerships just so important for trust and safety?
Yeah, I mean, we have over 100 partners, and they help elevate our brand. You take United Way, it is one of the most recognized logos in the world, right? And so our partnership with United Way is really critical for us. They bring that brand trust and safety, and then our focus on quality and educating people on what kind of checks they should do, and why a nationwide is not the best check in the world to do on a standalone basis really helps combine those two.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great. So I want to take a minute and pause real quick and let our audience on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube know that there's still a little time. If you have questions for Mei and Katie, go ahead and put them in the comment section, and I'll get them over to these two. But as we wait for any potential questions to come through, I just want to make a blanket statement that this was such a great conversation so far, 39 minutes in. I do want to gather some final thoughts from the both of you, though, as we wrap up today's show. So Mei, I'll start with you. Final thoughts for today.
So I just love this quote. And it's for me, it's like, whoever you are, whether you're an individual that's taken some time to sort of reflect on, as I go back, I really want to do things that are more meaningful. I think it's given people the opportunity to say, I've had to say no intentionally to a lot of things, but I don't know that I'm going to say yes to everything. I'm going to be more thoughtful about it. But it could be, you at a company, organizing your volunteers, or you at a nonprofit thinking about it. And it's this Arthur Ashe quote, where start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And I just think that's the message that, we wherever the beginning point is for you, that's the perfect place to begin. And it doesn't, we're not going to turn into Mother Teresa overnight. We're not going to see everything, solved in a day. And so I think it's just, that permission, that grace for each of us, to sort of like, we want to do something, we're interested in doing something. And I think it's great, but be thoughtful of where you're developing those things. What is it that you're trying to do? And I think we've been given, this opportunity in a horrific sort of way, but to do that. And so that would be my closing thought for us.
Perfect for today's episode, and perfect for just everything right now. So I'm very happy you shared that quote. I really appreciate that. Katie, final thoughts from you.
I think that this conversation has been really optimistic, but not to bring us down. But I do think about all those that were in isolation during COVID. And I would just say, volunteerism is one of the best ways, and probably one of the easiest ways to connect with other people. And so, Mei hit it at the top of the conversation, just the health benefits if you volunteer, to those who volunteer and those that are recipients of your time and talents and treasures. So I would just recommend that everybody call their local United Way and find out where your skills and interests can be best utilized. Get out there.
No, definitely a great thing to close on. And as always, if you do need to learn more about both Sterling Volunteers and United Way, definitely go over to our social channels, go to our website. So it's sterlingvolunteers.com, and then it's unitedway.org. So any more information that you need to get over there. And like Katie just said, get out and volunteer. I think that's great. But thank you both so much for joining us live today. I know I learned a ton from that engaging conversation, and I know our audience did as well. Thank you to our audience tuning in live week after week to Sterling Live. We usually are only once a week, but we actually have an episode tomorrow. So I do want our audience to know that we will be live at 4 p.m. Eastern tomorrow across all of our platforms. So we will see you then. But as of right now, thank you both again. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. That was fun. Thanks again, Mei.
Of course. Thank you, everyone.